So welcome everybody. Can everyone see the slides okay? Just a thumbs up if you can see that. Great. So welcome to the last of these 6 sessions of presenting the path. This is the Discovering Buddhism module 3, and we've been looking at, we'll do a little summary today, as I mentioned earlier, just a summary of all the points we got up to so far. We're going to explore a little bit about Tantra today, because Tantra is kind of like the advanced bit of the path. So it's good to get a complete picture of that. So we'll just do a little bit of that today. And then a little discussion in the middle. And then a chance just for you to ask any questions about the whole path. If I can answer anything, I don't know. If you've got questions, I'll do my best to answer. Yeah, so without further ado then, let's start as usual with a little meditation together. Well, the meditation is just a way to focus our minds in the right frame. Because this is a Buddhist class, you don't have to be Buddhist or, to listen to these teachings, of course, but just I'm going to explain how Buddhists would do it. And then if you're interested, you can follow along. So the first 2 minds that we generate in this first verse are called refuge and bodhicitta. A refuge is the mind that understands the difficulties of samsaric existence, of unenlightened existence, and wants to kind of take safety in something. Like we turn to safety a lot in our own lives in different ways. We'd run towards usually temporary things to bring about some kind of distraction, food or sleep, but here we're trying to think about a spiritual path, and that means we're kind of looking on the inside for a change rather than the outside, the opposite to what the world tells us, right? The materialist culture, the consumer culture tells us that we can find happiness on the outside. We just need something on the outside to make us happy, and if we get more of that stuff, then we'll be happy. But that's counterproductive from a Buddhist point of view, because those can't bring about real kind of profound happiness. They can only bring some temporary fixes. So from a spiritual point of view, we need to take refuge in something else. And what that comes down to from the Buddhist point of view is taking refuge in our own minds of kindness, humility, generosity, compassion, and wisdom. Those are the real refuge at the end of the day. So that's kind of what this whole module is about, exploring the path. And then the second mind we generate is bodhicitta, the wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all living beings, which we touched on last week. So I'm just going to recite this verse a couple of times in Tibetan and then once in English. You're welcome to join me if you like. But just bring to mind, something as you understand it about refuge and bodhicitta. And that, then it means that this action we do together, this class, this discussion and study for the next hour and a bit, becomes a cause for something greater than just, a worldly pursuit. It becomes causes for future lives, happiness, and full enlightenment. Sangye chudang sagi chanam lai chanchu padu dani kapsu chi dagi chanyangi pesanam gi drala penche sangye drapara sho Sangye chudang sagi chanam lai chanchu padu dani kapsu chi dagi chanyangi pesanam gi Jala Penji Sangye Japasho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, thank you, everybody. We just got somebody new joining called Doreen. Let's just see. Welcome, Doreen. Doreen, hello there. It seems like you're new to the group. Hi, you just joined us. Are you there?
Yes.
Hi there. How are you doing, Doreen?
Hi. I'm fine, thanks.
Good, good. We haven't seen you at this class before. Are you quite new to Buddhism and looking for some explanations in particular, or do you know?
No, I'm not new to Buddhism, and
Okay.
I used to attend the London Jamyang.
Oh, great.
And of course, I haven't been there for a while, but
Right.
I attended a retreat there a couple of Easters ago.
Okay, with Geshe Tashi, was that when he was there?
I know, yeah, I remember knowing, and I didn't know Jesse Tasha.
Right, very
Yeah,
lovely. Yeah, he was an amazing teacher.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome. Good. I've just started. We just did a motivation and some prayers together, so you're very welcome. I would just ask that people mute the microphones during the presentation, and then if they want to ask a question, just unmute your microphone and ask away.
Can I just ask very quickly, how does the session go?
So it's basically a presentation. I've got some slides that we go through for about half an hour. Then there's a little discussion.
Yeah.
And then there's a dedication at the end. But
Okay.
as I say, any point during the session, you're welcome just to unmute yourself, microphone, and ask a question if there's something you'd like to
Fine.
discuss. Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. You're very welcome. All right. So I'm just going to mute everybody. Okay, so here we are then with the course outline. So here we are at actually week 6 of 6 sessions we've been looking at. So if you just joined us for today's session, that's great because you get to see a summary of the whole thing. But for those of you who joined us from the beginning, it's an exam time for you. Not this session, but we'll do a little talk with you separately. So for those people who are doing this as an exam with a completion card, if you could just stay on the call at the end and we'll just plan in when we can do that together with you. But what we covered in the first week was Buddha and the Four Noble Truths. So who was the Buddha? What was his message? And his first teaching, the Four Noble Truths. Does somebody from the group want to explain what the Four Noble Truths are? Or at least to say what they are? Oh, somebody brave.
The first noble truth is that there's suffering. The second noble truth is the cause of suffering. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the path from suffering, which is the noble eightfold path.
Right, exactly. Yeah, good. Or as it says in the Heart Sutra briefly, suffering, origination, cessation, and path. Just remember the 4 words. Great. Okay, good. And then we looked at week 2. We looked at how the Buddha's teachings get from 2,500 years ago to 2021, and how that got to us through a series of masters and realized beings who listened to the Buddha first of all, then passed it on to their students, and those students became the teachers and passed it on to their students, and the students became the teachers, etc. And written commentaries, explanations, etc. for over 2,500 years. It's quite a remarkable lineage. And what in particular is relevant to us for this module is that around the 10th, 11th century, this master Atisha from India created this series of graded steps called the Lam Rim. So Lam Rim graded steps from 1 to, well, that's not a number, it's just, from point 1 to wherever the end is, however many points that is. So we can easily get to grips with what the Buddha's, path is for us, right? From our understanding, how we get from where we are to enlightenment. Should we want to, we have to just assess it first. So that was week 2. We looked at the lineage, and then Atisha, this master who created these steps out of the Buddha's teachings. And then we looked at, how those steps work in weeks 3, 4, and 5. So there was preliminaries, small, middle, and great scope. So there's 4 areas we looked at. We looked at the first 2 in week 3, then the middle scope in week 4, week 5, great scope, which is last week. And then this week we're going to look at just a bit of summary, and then a little bit explanation about Tantra, which is then everything is complete. Everything the Buddha taught, then you will have, you'll have had some explanation of in summary, right? At least you know the outline once we've covered a bit of Tantra, right? So let's have a look here. This is a quote from the Lamrim Chenmo by Lama Tsongkhapa. The teacher, Shang Nachung, said, "Even though I asked for instructions from the great elder Atisha, he said nothing except, renounce the world, cultivate the spirit of enlightenment. Upon hearing this, Geshe Dromtumpa was embarrassed for him and said, "You received the great elder's ultimate instruction." Geshe Dromtumpa understood the core of the teaching. So what's happening here is a teacher who was the creator of the Lam Rim, right, had this a few different disciples and students, and one of his close disciples was called Geshe Dromtumpa. I don't know why they call him Geshe. Anyway, Dromtumpa, I can't remember his full title, was one of his close disciples and actually continued passing on the teachings when our teacher passed away, right? He's one of the students that became the teacher. And he understood that this advice that a teacher had given to another student was really quite profound, but this other student didn't get it. He said he'd asked for instructions and all the teacher had said were just a couple of words. I mean, what good is that? But Dromtumpa understood, well, actually, everything is in that, everything, the core of the teaching, as Lama Tsongkhapa says, is right there. Renounce the world and cultivate the spirit of enlightenment. So that renouncing the world needs a bit of explanation, because it doesn't mean we have to give up, the world. It means that we're just wishing to be free from the suffering, which is the first noble truth, first two noble truths, right? Suffering, you have to understand the suffering, the Buddha said. And once you've understood the suffering, you'll definitely be clear that you want to be removing it. It's like, it's the way we work. We discover we've got a sickness and it becomes unbearable. And we think we have to get rid of this sickness, the illness, etc., like a pandemic. And then we look at the causes and then we find a cure, right? So the causes we know is a virus or whatever. In terms of samsaric existence, the causes are much subtler than the physical ones. And then, those first two noble truths describe the process in which we find ourselves stuck in samsara, the causes and the symptoms of that. So if we can renounce that in the sense that we wish to emancipate ourselves from all the difficulties, that's by renouncing the world, the wish to be free. And when we talk about the three principal aspects of the path, renunciation is the first one. Renunciation. It's a bit of an old-fashioned word there. Did anybody listen to Geshe Jampol's teachings last Wednesday when he was explaining a bit about this? No. You can watch that video on our YouTube channel. It was interesting topic about renunciation. And then the spirit of enlightenment is another one of these three principal aspects of the path. Which is this mind of bodhicitta, which we talked about earlier, the wish to become enlightened for all sentient beings. So by renouncing the world, you get yourself out of samsara, and by the spirit of enlightenment, you get everyone else out of samsara. So that's the whole path covered in those two. There's one other principal aspect that they talk about, the right view or right understanding, wisdom realizing emptiness. But you can include that renunciation because, the method to be renounced from samsara, the method to actually remove yourself from samsara, cyclic existence, is the wisdom realized emptiness. So you could put it there. So, as Geshe Dromtumpa said, you receive the great elders, talking about a teacher, the great elders' ultimate instruction. So we're going to come back to that at the end. Just to remind ourselves of the Four Noble Truths then. So just going to do a little summary before we get on to Tantra then, to put it into context. The Four Noble Truths, truth of suffering, truth the cause of suffering. Those two are the way that we bind ourselves to cyclic existence. This wish, this kind of this uncontrolled process where we have to take rebirth again and again without any control due to karma and afflictions. And then the last two noble truths, the third and fourth, is the way out. The third one is that that can be done. There is a cessation of all this suffering, cyclic existence. And then the fourth noble truth is how you get there, the method, the path. And here we are with presenting the path, right? This is the whole point of this module, presenting the path just in these 6 sessions. And then the rest of the DB modules go into more detail about these aspects of the path. Does anyone remember I'll come back to that. So the Four Noble Truths are the very first thing that the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago. And then everything he taught for 40 years after that was basically around this topic of we don't experience happiness completely. We don't have ultimate, rich, reliable happiness. and why that is, the causes of that. That the Buddha had then experienced, him coming enlightened, he'd experienced that just an ordinary being, he'd become free of all that. And then how he did it, the path, right? So I know what my question was. Does anyone remember what the path means in this context? A path.
Mind.
Mind.
The mind.
A mind, yeah. A particular type of mind, obviously. We have lots of different minds. The mind that thinks I just want some lunch because I'm hungry, or want to drink because I'm thirsty, that's not a particularly important mind. So I wouldn't necessarily call that a path. It's something that's leading us to a liberation from, a separation from difficulty. So we either call that nirvana or enlightenment, Enlightenment just means that you're free from all the obscurations in the mind, all the things that are causing us distress, and you've achieved everything that can be possibly achieved. It's like this, the peak, it's the ultimate place, the ultimate cleaning, if you like, and the ultimate realization. So why, I was reading it in a book by His Holiness this morning, when he starts off talking about his Lamrim books, which I'll mention later. There is no Buddhist explanation about why we're here, in the grand scheme of things, why the universe is here. And does this, I was looking at a documentary earlier on this afternoon about, what happens, when the universe ends, according to the latest theories. I don't know what you if any of you are scientists and have some idea about, the latest scientific findings about what happens in the universe, but it seems they were saying the theory is just all goes cold and black, everything disappears and there's nothing left, just kind of black, and it's also very cold, and that's it. The universe expands forever and ever. That seems to be one of the theories anyway. And the theory is that the last moments of the universe, it's dark matter that's left. So if this dark matter then fades away, then it all collapses and starts again. That seems to fit in more with what I've heard from Buddhist teachings. The Big Bang is great. It's just not the first Big Bang. From a Buddhist point of view, that seems to fit more with what I understand about Buddhism, but it's yet to be found out by science. We're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of years in the future, so difficult to know exactly, right? But why that is here, there isn't a particular Buddhist explanation. Samsara, the cycle of having to take, births and deaths continuously over and over. And within that, that's the being's experience within the universe, which is kind of has a cycle of its own. So why we're here in that, there isn't any reason. It's just that's how it is. But where there is some purpose, if you like, for existence, is to remove suffering and to become free of difficulty, because nobody wants suffering. We all want happiness. It doesn't matter if we know where the universe comes from, where it's going or not. That's not going to stop people wanting to be free of suffering, is it? And someone's not going to turn around, as Solon said in his book, someone's not going to turn around and say, oh, well, I don't want to be free of suffering because I don't know why the universe is here. Or I don't know why samsara is here. It doesn't matter, does it? The experience of being human for us, and the experience of being an animal, which you can see in the way animals react to pain and difficulty, is that they'd rather not, thank you very much. They'd rather be free of that. And different levels of suffering, obviously, the more complicated the sentient being finds itself with the brain, etc., the more it can look into the deeper levels of suffering. Animals haven't got much of a chance of that. They could just work on the basis of, this is too hot, it's too cold, this is dangerous, I'm going to stay away, etc. But we can obviously look at much deeper levels of suffering than that. Suffering might not become the right word then, as I think I've mentioned before. It might be more like dissatisfaction, or some of those deeper words that will help us describe that. So if that's the meaning then of, or the purpose of being alive, what the universe is doing, doesn't really concern us, because there's like two strands here. There's a strand of like evolution and the universe and the matter, and on the other hand, there's us as our humans, our spiritual evolution. We can definitely go in a certain direction, whereas the universe is kind of just, doing its thing. And our bodies are part of that. but our minds are not. Our mind is the bit that can change and grow and develop and then become limitless, not stuck. The universe is a set system which our bodies belong to, and our minds are trapped in that as long as we haven't liberated the mind. Does that make sense? So the whole point of the Buddhist path then is to reach that spiritual evolution where we're free of being stuck in a system where we can't get out, where we have control, which is apparently what the Buddha did. Now, I don't know that because, I'm not enlightened myself. I just have to go with what the Buddha says as a hypothesis, and I'm going to test it and see if it's true. And the way you do that as scientists, if we're good, sensible, logical, intelligent beings, we'll try and work it out for ourselves. We won't believe it because the Buddha said it or because someone told us. We'll try and prove it ourselves. So then you just follow some of the basic principles with an open mind that the Buddha was talking about, and you see if it works. See if you can get some of these realizations. See if it works internally, what's happening, what he says you'll find, the measure of these realizations. And then we'll know, and if some of it starts to prove right, I think, well, if he's right about that, then maybe he's right about step 2. So I'll try that. If he's right about step 2, maybe he's right about steps 4, 5, and 6. And then eventually it'll snowball. I think, okay, I'm convinced now because 4 and 2, 3, and 4 and 5 have proved right. Then I know enlightenment is going to be possible. But we have to start from where we are, which is the beginning of the Lam Rim, right? So this is why the Lam Rim is such a fantastic system, because we can get a hold on what it means to be a spiritual practitioner in Buddhism. It means going through certain levels of realization. Realization is this odd term, and I've never quite found a replacement for that term, realization, but we'll stick with it for now. Like where the penny drops, when you've realized something and your worldview changes. That's what we're talking about, realizations. We already have certain views about how we and things exist. So when someone tells us a different view, it'll seem a bit odd. We don't think we have views. We just think, we're just coasting along and things as they are. But that's not quite true according to Buddhist psychology. The Buddhist psychology of the mind, the Buddhist philosophy, is that we already have strong views which are actually rooted in misunderstandings. And that is the root of the difficulties. So I just wanted to recap on Atisha here. For those of you who are doing the completion card, you'll need to know this, or some of these details anyway. Atisha, born in Bengal. Then due to the kindness of the Tibetans, he created this text called the Lam Rim. So if it wasn't for the Tibetans, we wouldn't have perhaps we wouldn't have this series of teaching, this kind of tradition of teachings that was then created thanks to Atisha. So we have a lot to thank the Tibetans for. Not only did they preserve Tibetan Buddhism for 1,000 years, until they got, until it kind of nearly lost its footing because of the Chinese Communist Party, but it's still surviving, fortunately, through the efforts of many people like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So that system is still survives. And if you read things like the text by Lama Tsongkhapa, who was one of our particular Tibetan tradition's founder, Lama Tsongkhapa, born in 1357. To read his book, the Lam Rim Chenmo, which has been published, The Great Lam Rim, The Great Stages on the Path to Enlightenment, 3 volumes, quite thick volumes. But if you read that, it's so clear. You wouldn't think to read a text in the Middle Ages, you'd be able to get anything. But that just shows the quality of the translators and the quality of the writer, the author, Lama Tsongkhapa, that we can have such a clear experience just by reading it. This is His Holiness's quote. I had this earlier in the slides, you may remember. What distinguishes it, the Lam Rim, is its scope and clarity. It expounds the entire path from the way one should rely on a spiritual teacher, which is the very root, right up to the attainment of Buddhahood, which is the final fruit. The various stages of the path are presented so clearly and systematically that they can be easily understood and are inspiring to put into practice. So if we want to experience the same things that the Buddha and Lama Tsongkhapa and all the Dalai Lamas experienced, and these great beings, then we have to get clear about what steps we need in which order, and then to understand how easy it is to actually practice them. They're not difficult meditations, most of them. They just need repetition. How long it takes before the mind kind of gets it, before we kind of have it so deep and so clear that then okay, now I understand what that actually means. And the time it takes to get that, I don't know. I haven't got anything myself. So here, let's look at how this relates to Tantra then, because this was the last little bit of the story, if you like, presenting the path. We looked at the preliminary practices of the Lamrim. We looked at small scope. We looked at middle scope. We looked at the great scope. And you could say that those are all sutra, right? What sutra has a very specific meaning. What the Buddha taught, speech of the Buddha. You can debate about that. If it's written down, it's not the speech of the Buddha, is it? Because the speech of the Buddha is a sound, not text. But anyway, sutras. So sometimes in the Tibetan monasteries, well, in most Tibetan monasteries, I think they have all the Buddhist texts, the teachings of the Buddha on one side, and then all the Indian masters' commentaries on the other, the commentaries called the Shastras. So sutra is this teaching of the Buddha. Now, Tantra is also a teaching of the Buddha, but it has a kind of particular difference from a sutra. So sutra and Tantra have slightly different, we'll look at the differences shortly. So we just explained the sutra system up till now. Yep. All those meditations in the Lamrim are based on sutra, all of Buddha's teachings in sutra. And what's happening on this diagram here on the screen is you've got fundamental vehicle on the bottom, the Hinayana. Then on that, you've got the universal vehicle, the Mahayana, perfection vehicle. Above that, universal vehicle, Mahayana, tantric vehicle. So the top two are both Mahayana, and the bottom there is the fundamental vehicle. So the universal vehicle is practiced on the basis of the fundamental vehicle, and the tantric vehicle is practiced on the basis of the perfection vehicle. Does that make sense? That's why I put the arrows going up there, so we could see just visually the way I thought about it when I was putting this together. Right. So those, so the Hinayana, or the fundamental vehicle, is practiced on our planet today as mainly survives as the Theravada tradition. Right. So the monks in the Saffron Mothers, we have some in Leeds actually, in North Leeds, in Headingley. You see some, well, I used to see them walking around the days when we could get out. It was very nice to see, and they kind of sometimes called the elder tradition, the Pali tradition, because that was the language the texts were first written in. And those first meditations, the small and middle scopes of the Lamrim, are basically the fundamental vehicle. Yep. But as we know, you see, the bodhisattvas or people practicing the great scope also have to practice the small and middle scopes, right? So that's why, the basis of practicing the Mahayana, they have to understand the fundamental vehicle. Absolutely essential. You can't not. It's like you can't start at step 5. You can't just jump to step 5. You've got to go through 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can't, if it's a ladder, you can't just jump and get to the top of the ladder. You have to go from the bottom rung all the way up, right? So the universal vehicle or perfection vehicle here, a great scope, a great capable being, looking at bodhicitta and those 6 perfections, for example, perfection of wisdom. Does anyone remember the 6 perfections, which was the practices of a great scope being?
Generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration and wisdom.
Superb. Yeah. Does anyone remember the practices of the middle capable being or the middle scope being would do?
ethics, concentration and wisdom.
Superb. And what about the practices of the small scope being? Small scope?
The 10 virtues. No.
Yes, 10 virtues, which is abandoning the 10 non-virtues that way. Yeah.
No, it's like the yeah.
You put out a bit there, Maggie. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, I can't hear you because it keeps jumping about. But so you repeat. Sorry.
I couldn't hear you. That's what I said.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't. I'm sort of filling in the gaps because I can't hear it all the time. But anyway, what did you say?
I don't remember now. I've got lost in the loops.
Remember what? Maybe plenty of time.
Yeah. Okay. I think I remember what I was saying now. So when you said it was the 10 practicing the 10 virtuous actions, which is good because the other way you could say it is to abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions. We always come from the positive angle, which is very nice. Saying the 10 virtuous actions rather than abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions.
Yeah, more positive.
Right. Lovely. Yeah, good. Is everybody with me so far? Have I lost anybody? I can't always see all the screens at the same time. So if you want to anything explained up to now, just unmute yourself. Okay. I assume that if silence means you've understood everything, right? Good. Great. Okay. So then part of the Mahayana then is the tantric vehicle. So let's look at a bit of that. You made us this image on the right here. I'll explain that in a minute. So Buddha taught Sutra and Tantra for different practitioners. So here's some of the differences and some of the similarities, just to get an idea of what Tantra is about. Tantra is advanced, is the first thing to say, needs understanding of emptiness and bodhicitta. So to get to emptiness and bodhicitta, you need to have understood that in Sutra, the Lamrim, right? Where does emptiness come up in the Lamrim? The wisdom realizing emptiness. Which scope?
Great scope.
Before that,
it's the middle scope.
the middle scope.
Before.
Middle scope.
Oh. Okay.
Anybody who wants to be free from samsara, according to the Prasangika, well, according to Mahayana, just make sure I get it right. According to the Prasangika, Madhyamika, Mahayana, they need to have the wisdom realizing emptiness. Other schools will stay different, but I won't get into that. But, basically you need wisdom realizing emptiness to get out of samsara. So if your goal isn't enlightenment, but just to get out of samsara, that's middle scope, right? So the middle scope practitioner is just wanting to get out of samsara. So all they need is wisdom realizing emptiness. They don't need bodhicitta. They'll definitely have much more love and compassion than I've got. Those practitioners, their love and compassion just outstanding. Not as much as the bodhisattvas, but still more than the untrained practitioners like I am. So, yeah. So you get that from the middle scope, and then bodhicitta obviously is realization, the great scope, right? Yeah. Does that make sense? Everyone, understands that. Now, when I say, I've just put here needs understanding because there's different explanations. Because you could say, you just need to have some understanding of those, some study and some level of understanding of those to practice Tantra, which is what happens for older people like us. But to practice Tantra properly, I have heard one Lama say, as I think I mentioned earlier, you need to have a realization of emptiness and bodhicitta, which is different. So anybody, can understand emptiness and bodhicitta in terms of a scholastic point of view, right? Plenty of university professors teaching Buddhism who are not Buddhists would be able to explain, emptiness and bodhicitta to their students so they can pass their exams, but they haven't realized it necessarily, right? So that to realize emptiness in bodhicitta is a different thing. So that's why I just put needs understanding, and then you decide for yourself what that means. Then the goal of the sutra practitioner and the tantric practitioner, well, at least in the Mahayana, is the same, is for enlightenment. Yep. They're both trying to get, if you're practicing tantra or you're a great scope practitioner, you're both trying to get to enlightenment for all living beings. So the goal is the same, enlightenment for the sake of all beings. But the how you get there is different in sutra and tantra, the method. So whereas in sutra system, we've been doing these meditations on like death and impermanence, and precision and rebirth, karma, the sufferings of psychic existence, recognize sentient beings as our mother, etc. All those meditations we discussed about before, they're all meditations which you do, and wisdom realizing emptiness you do at one point, then you come out of that and do a meditation on this. So they're all quite separate little blocks. They all feed into each other, and they're all kind of part of the same process, but they're kind of like, you know, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, etc. What Tantra does is it kind of mixes things together in this kind of visual process where the meditation manuals take you through visualizing yourself as a Buddha already, and you kind of join the wisdom realizing emptiness and the bodhicitta, the method aspect, together in these visualizations and practices. So it's quite an advanced, you know, system. And the Buddha sought that because for some people, that is going to get them to enlightenment quicker. You know, some people are ready for a Ferrari. Some people have got the money for it. Some of us, you know, can only afford a scooter. So. Or walk, you know, so we haven't got enough merit, we haven't got enough money, right? So but for those people who've got the Ferraris, great, you know, then the Buddha taught that method. Yeah, I just put some details of why the method is different there. So Tantra is using subtle winds, channels, and drops. We did a module actually the last time we did the DB cycle, which is just about a couple of months back, wasn't it? I suppose now, because we're at the beginning of this intake. So anyway, I explained a bit about Tantra then. Maybe some of you remember some of that. Subtle winds. The Buddha described the system of the body and the mind differently in Tantra, or rather, he didn't explain the sutra. He explained it in Tantra. So like the nervous system in the body, like the channels, like the nervous system is like these series of channels where energy runs through, or like the blood in the veins, etc. There's something like that on a very subtle level, the Buddha said, where the mind runs through those different channels. So the mind runs on subtle winds through channels, and the channels have certain drops. And at certain points, you know, the channels, if you like, are knotted. Especially this big central channel that we have, certain knots, you know, there's one here, one at the throat, one at the navel, etc. There's 5 or 6, depending on different systems. And they're called chakras, where these knots are kind of these, where the energies are blocked. So you can probably tell that some of these system is already in use in other traditions, right? Tantra is also used in Hinduism, which is where yoga comes from. So you often see about chakras and balancing chakras and all that in yoga, because it comes from Hinduism, and Hinduism also has a Tantra. So whether the Buddha stole it from Hindus or not, or whether that existed before Hinduism, is difficult to say. Obviously, we don't know that. But what is different, you know, that Hinduism isn't working for enlightenment, and they don't have the wisdom realizing emptiness. So, you know, where you get to with Buddhist Tantra is different, even though some of the terms are going to be the same. Yeah, Buddha, 2,500 years ago, was the only person we know of to teach the wisdom realizing emptiness, to say that nothing exists from its own side. There's no other tradition on the planet that has said that. I haven't checked them all, that's just what I understand, or what I've read. Science, it seems, is getting close on some of these things. You know, it's interesting parallels between where science goes with quantum physics, etc., quantum mechanics, and understanding that, you know, the further you go down these things, the more it is about what you can see objectively, but what you see subjectively. You know, the mind plays, the observer plays a part in how matter works, right? So then it becomes closer and closer to that. Interesting, right? So there is a bridge there. His Holiness says, there's a bridge where Buddhism can provide a bridge between, the scientific view and the religious view. There's a bridge there where Buddhism could unite those two. So it's quite interesting to think about how that's going to work. I don't know how I got to all that. Anyway, another feature of Tantra was that in the sutra system, you want to abandon the afflictions, and Tantra also wants to abandon them in the end. But you see until you've abandoned them in the sutra system, you use methods to temporarily suppress them, counteract them until you've got the wisdom realizing emptiness, in which case you move them directly. In tantric system, you can use the afflictions to destroy the afflictions. So that's quite advanced. It's like playing with fire. That one, you have to be careful to know what you're doing. And also deity yoga. That's another feature of Tantra, where you visualize yourself as an enlightened being already, and then move the channels and the winds around, etc., artificially at first, but then it happens for real, the better we get. So this figure on the right here, the picture you can see is Chenrezig, was called the Buddha of Compassion. This is 1,000 armed Chenrezig. So you can see there, he's got 1,000 arms, maybe if you count them all, and each hand has got an eye in there, got 9 faces. The central hands there, central hands are holding particular implements, and the faces are different colors, etc. And it's all symbolic. There isn't somebody out there that we're worshipping with 1,000 arms and all those heads. This is a representation, a graphical map, if you like, of something that practitioner would meditate on in Tantra. So you visualize yourself as this being, and each of those parts, this is explained to me, I kind of got this from a teaching from the Lama who's now the Ganden Tripper. At the time, he was called Lobsang Tenzin. Khensa Rinpoche, because he was an abbot. I can't remember feeling the title, I forget. So he's now the Ganden Tripper, the head of the Gelug lineage. Wonderful Lama. And he explained when I was listening to some teachings at the Nalanda Monastery, that it was like a map. Each of these parts of the picture or the things that you visualize in Tantra have a meaning, like the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path or the Banding the 10 Non-Virtuous Actions or the points of bodhicitta. All those points in the Lam Rim Sutra are kind of graphically represented as an image, either as the deity here, deity being enlightened being, or as the mandala, the palace where this being resides, etc. These are all visualizations. So it's like you're holding, what to me that meant like you're holding all the Buddha's teachings, all the realizations in a visual form. And the clearer you can get on those, it's said to be that then, you can move energies around in the channels and you get to a very subtle mind. Now, when you get to a very subtle mind in Tantra, which is what the system's supposed to do, then all you're doing with it is realizing emptiness, So it still comes back to that. You still have to use realizing emptiness to get to enlightenment, and you still need bodhicitta. You can't practice Tantra without it. But it's just a different way of getting there, right? Said to be quicker if you've got, the right skills. You can get enlightened in one lifetime if you can practice Tantra correctly. Yeah. So why it's important to mention Tantra is because while it's not specifically mentioned in as a path, if you like, in the Lam Rim, tantric practices have become very infused with Tibetan culture and the way Tibetan masters explain things. So Lama Tsongkhapa would just often, Geshe Tashi would say, Lama Tsongkhapa is putting things in there that come from tantric sources or explaining from a tantric point of view, because it's kind of very much embedded in what people are practicing. Yeah. And we see that already, don't we? I don't know if you've ever been to the Buddhist center at Jamang Leeds or any of Tibetan Buddhist centers. It's very colorful because the Tibetan tantric practices are very colorful. The deities of Tara, etc., of Vajrasattva, which you do after this, of Chenrezig, compassion. These are all tantric images, representations of qualities in an image, which are very helpful for us. Even if we're not practicing Tantra, they're very helpful for us because it gets us out of our small idea of ourself and expands into something bigger. And then we can concentrate on the qualities of compassion, of wisdom, which is Manjushri, represented by a sword who cuts ignorance, or represented by Tara, who's swift pacifier, this green emanation, a female deity who's got one foot ready to pounce to help sentient beings. Or with compassion here, represented as 1,000 arms with 1,000 eyes, so that wherever sentient beings exist, in whatever realms they find themselves suffering and difficulties, you know, it's being looked over and guided and cared for by these 1,000 compassionate arms. So it helps us, even though we're not necessarily tantric practitioners, to develop qualities of compassion. And I think it's quite creative. You know, Lama Geshe was all for us to practice tantra. Says it gets us out of our small little version of ourselves into something much bigger and much vaster. Yeah, so that's why in Tibetan tradition, a lot of these images and phrases, etc., are quite common practices. Yeah. Tantra can be divided into 4: action, performance, yoga, and highest yoga. So that's something that you would study a bit further on in more advanced classes than this one, but just to give you that information. There's other ways to divide tantric practices, but that's one way, common way. The only systems that tend to survive now, well, the only system that I know exists right now is action and highest yoga tantra. The middle two aren't practiced, as far as I know. So my recommendation here is that you don't practice tantra until you've understood a bit of sutra. If you're a beginner, you know, I would say do a program like DB or basic program, or FBT, the Foundation of Buddhist Thought course, etc., and then maybe think about tantric practice. That's just my suggestion. Not everyone does it the same way. You might have different imprints than I do, but generally I think that's a good place to start. Because if you start practicing advanced stuff without having understood why you're doing the advanced stuff, you know, it's going to get, it could actually do some damage. That's the point. You know, you could be kind of caught up in some mystical magic and you're not really understanding what the point is. You haven't understood that you could die any minute and you could go up the lower realms, etc. You haven't understood the basics. You'll kind of forget that and you'll just go into this crazy idea because, you know, tantra was supposed to be kept secret, but unfortunately with the internet, things kind of just got out of hand. So then, you know, lamas like the Dalai Lama said, well, look, if the information's out there, it better be explained carefully so that people don't do any damage to themselves. So that's why it's all out there. And if, you know, if these practices are done without the wish to be free of samsara and without the wish to help all living beings, it'll feed into your ego, actually. It'll increase your attachment to samsara. And we see it on the internet all the time. If you type tantra into a Google search engine, you have to be careful what you look at because it's going to be synonymous with all kinds of pornography and strange teachers teaching all these things about consorts and sex, right? So you have to protect yourself from what is a wrong path and what is a correct path, right? If it's not leading you to enlightenment, then it doesn't count as Buddhist practice. You better stay away. So that's why I recommend for beginners, we learn sutra system first. So any questions then on Tantra, because that's all I'm going to mention about Tantra for this module, because that comes up as the last module in DB, which will be a little while yet. But if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to see if I can help. All right. Here's discussion point for today then. What meditations in the Lam Rim have you really connected with? Or which ones remain a mystery? A mystery in the sense, you know, which ones haven't you really connected with, don't you really get? Think it's irrelevant. Maybe there's something like that. Maybe there's something you thought, wow, this one's really important for me. I should really concentrate on this one. Or, wow, I never thought about this. I would really find that quite influential from my experience. Something like that. I want you to kind of just analyze all the meditations we've looked at in those scopes and see which ones are kind of proving, you know, good for you and which ones, you know, are not feeling so relevant. Now, whether they're all relevant, but just which ones you're connecting with right now, that's what I'm interested to see. Just to see, you know, it's not for me to judge or anything. It's just for you to explore which ones you're enjoying, really. But that's why the question is there. Does anyone remind you of what the meditations are? Just, or somebody else wants to tell me what the meditations are. What are some of the meditations of the small scope? Well, let's do preliminaries first. meditations are preliminary before we get to small scope. What are some of those? I think we mentioned 2. Was it 2 or 3?
Precious human birth.
Good. What else?
Death and
No,
the nearness of death.
that's the beginning of the small scope, that one. What preliminaries first? So precious human rebirth is one. What's before that? What's the very root? The foundation of all good qualities is the
Guru, precious guru.
yes, the how to correctly rely on a spiritual teacher. Okay, then small scope, Stuart, is the first one is what?
Precious human birth. No.
No,
Oh, death then.
death,
Gotta be.
that's the one. So the beginning of the small scope is impermanence, which is our death. So that's, remember, not about death itself, it's about the process of moving from one life to the other and how we need to prepare for that movement, where we go next.
And the next one must be the possibility of rebirth in the lower realm.
Superb, good, yeah. And then what's the ones after that then? Anybody? So karma, refuge, and then abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions, kind of putting karma into practice, if you like. The middle scope, what are the meditations? Just the first half of the middle scope about how to develop renunciation from samsara. If you want to develop disgust for samsara, what do you meditate on? How disgusting samsara is, which is what?
Karma and afflictions.
No.
No?
Well, that's the causes of psychic existence. So yeah, you could meditate on that. You're quite right. Sorry. Yeah, you could meditate on karma afflictions. But I was thinking more about the first noble truth, the suffering. So that's where the Four Noble Truths come in.
There's also meditation on the unsatisfactoriness of the higher realms.
Right. Well, dissatisfaction of the higher realms. Yeah.
Yeah.
You look at samsara as a whole, even the higher realms are full of dissatisfaction and anxiety and low self-esteem and problems, and it's temporary, and you'll just go back into more difficult situations later. It doesn't last too long.
Yeah.
It's unstable and reliable. Right? So those are the kind of minds that you generate to get out of the whole cycle completely, which is the meditation on the suffering of samsara and its causes, which is karma and afflictions, as Aditya quite rightly said there. And then what's the important meditation to get out of samsara then? The middle scope.
The 3 higher trainings,
Yep.
ethics, concentration and wisdom.
And what does it come down to? What are you going to have to get out of samsara?
Emptiness.
Wisdom.
Realizing emptiness.
Yeah. Not just emptiness, because that's already there right now. We have to realize it.
Realizing emptiness, yeah.
Yep. Things are already empty. Nothing exists inherently. It's just we haven't realized that yet. Great. And then great scope. What's the realization of great scope we need?
Realizing that all beings have been our mother and father,
Yeah, good.
and then exchanging ourselves with other beings.
Right. So there's 2 methods. Exchanging oneself for others is the advanced one we didn't really mention, but 7-point method of cause and effect, which the first step is what Stuart mentioned there, but it's a whole method, 6 causes, 1 effect, to generate bodhicitta. So you could just say in a nutshell, realization you need for great scope is bodhicitta. And then how you do that is engage in the 6 perfections, how you get to enlightenment. Great. And then Tantra, at the end of that or during it, depending on how advanced you are. But certainly only if you're a great scope being. Yeah. There's no need for a small scope being to practice Tantra because they're just going for the next life. There's no need for practitioner of the great middle scope because they're just getting out of samsara. They're not working for enlightenment for all living beings. I know, I'll check that with a Lama whether a middle scope practice would want to practice Tantra. I don't think they could because, the method requires bodhicitta and they don't have bodhicitta. So it's a Mahayana practice. All right. Let's see how many are we. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 2 groups of 4. Let's just have discussion for about 6 or 7 minutes. You got the questions? Breakout groups are coming. So when it comes up on your screen, just click yes, and then you'll be there. So we're running a bit behind. So I think it's just best we don't feedback, otherwise we won't get to round up properly. Sorry, we're running out of time this week, but I hope that was helpful for you, just for you to figure out, how this experience of Lamrim is working for you. Hopefully some of these meditations are kind of touching something inside you to think, actually, this is quite important. Those first few meditations in particular about precious human rebirth and death and impermanence, those two going together are quite a kick to any spiritual practitioner. So if you're wanting something to focus on, you're not sure what, then I would recommend those two. They're all important, right? The root of the path is the relying on a spiritual teacher, etc. So it needs some study. But I'm just going to finish off by just putting some slides that show those people who are doing this as a module will need to learn, or at least have some knowledge of. So I've shared these outlines with you before, and I'll put the slides in Slack. If you haven't got access to Slack, let me know. I can't remember who hasn't here. But if you're not doing it as a module, don't worry, you can just relax. Here's something else you need to know about each of the scopes. You know all this already by now, of course, don't you? I've revised it throughout the session, hopefully, so we've covered it. Everybody will pass. It's okay. Just these aspirations are important. This is why it's a series of steps. It's like we talked about this before, haven't we? We talked about to go to London, we have to go through Wakefield and Nottingham on our hypothetical journey. So we have to know why the aspiration to go to Wakefield. Why would anybody want to go to Wakefield? Sorry if anybody lives in Wakefield, offend anybody. Gain a precious human life, next life is the first step. Then once you've got that series of steps of precious human rebirths, then you want to get rid of it all completely. And then, actually, what about everyone else? And that's the kind of final step. Further study then. So the rest of the DB module is the rest of the DB subjects are going to be looking at those in detail. So this is kind of like the summary, this 6 weeks, really. I'd recommend, see if you can find the root in our tradition with the Lamrim is obviously the Lamp of the Path by Atisha, which is what Geshe Jampal is explaining on Wednesday nights. So, at the beginning of the Lamrim, how it all started is excellently explained by a great master himself, someone who's studied and debated. Geshe Jampal was one of the best debaters, apparently, especially for Madhyamika, the highest view of emptiness philosophy. So maybe he's even realized it, we'll have to ask him. But to have somebody like that on Zoom to ask these questions to is very rare. So do take a chance of that. And then Tsongkhapa's explanation of Lamrim Chenmo here is a great book, which is published in 3 volumes. Volume 1, just start with volume 1, just read through the small scope and the middle scope, and the preliminaries, which are all in volume 1. And then you can look at the other 2 volumes later if you get into it. There's a commentary on the Lamrim Chenmo, which is just one book here by the Dalai Lama, From Here to Enlightenment. If you want an explanation of that, but you'll probably need the other book as to know what he's commenting on, right? See what I mean? If you want an extensive commentary, then there's one by Geshe Lundrup Sopa, from American, who's in America, or was, I think he passed away now. And that's 5 volumes of commentary. So that's the most detailed, probably in English, I think, of the Lamrim Chenmo. Yeah. Other ways to explore the Lamrim is this one book here called Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Pabonka Rinpoche. I think I mentioned that before. That's where a lot of us start with looking at Lamrim. It's quite a thick book, and it's a course that he gave, I think, over 1 or 2 months. about 100 years ago now. I think it's quite dated to monks and nuns, but he's a great storyteller. So there's these great stories as you go through, quite strict, you know, with his points of view, but stories are wonderful to read. So it's a nice companion to exploring those scopes of the Lamrim. Approaching the Buddhist path. And this is interesting. Now, this is the most modern, relevant probably to us in the 21st century, is the Dalai Lama's, basically the Dalai Lama's Lamrim. All his teachings over the past, 85 years have been compiled by Thubten Chodron, and some interviews, etc. And it's just the most phenomenal, series. You can't imagine a better way for us in the 21st century to learn about the Lamrim than the Dalai Lama's book here. So that's the first one. I think we've got 3 volumes out so far. And they'll cover everything. And he kind of comes from also from a scientific point of view. He puts bits of science in there, which you won't get in any other one. So that's quite special. And then FPMT Lineage series has Lama Zopa's explanation of the Lamrim, another modern master. That's the first book there, volume 1, which is about the foundation of the path, the Guru devotion, heart of the path. And then I think volume 2 is called How to Practice Dharma. Volume 3 is the Precious Human Rebirth. So then it's, they haven't got all the volumes out yet, but if you start, then you can just, follow along as they come out. So that's some further study. Any questions then on the Lamrim before we launch into the next module, which is how to correctly rely on a spiritual teacher? That's where we go next, the very root of the path, the next module. I'm not sure if that'll be me teaching it or someone else at this moment, but I'm not sure when it starts either. Unfortunately, we haven't got that sorted, but so I don't think it'll be next week, but it might be the week after. So look out for that. Any questions? Great. So let's finish with a dedication together then. And if I could ask those people who want to do this as the completion card for the module, if they could just stay on the call afterwards, and we'll just sort out when we can chat together for that. Okay. So let's just take a few deep breaths, close our eyes, and just have some space to detach from analytical thinking for just a second. So the whole of the Buddhist system kind of revolves around the idea of compassion. So that is the wish to be free from suffering, the wish for others to be free from suffering. For ourselves, the Buddha didn't say it was compassion for ourselves. He called that renunciation. So that's the way we free ourselves from suffering. And then the gateway, the entrance to the Mahayana is this compassion, the wish to free all beings from suffering. And the reason why we can't be happy is because of our afflictions, the minds of anxiety, loneliness, depression, cravings, and this dissatisfaction. We find ourselves never able to be satisfied. And these all have causes in the mind, which is the key. If we can understand that, then we know if we stop the causes, we can be liberated and free from suffering. It's just a case of learning, right? Learning the causes and the effects. So any positive karma that we've created together, let's dedicate for that, for our own liberation and for our full enlightenment as quickly as we can, step by step, so we can realize all the points of the Lamrim, from Guru devotion through to bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, and all the realizations of Tantra. And once we learn every system and every realization and have abandoned all that needs to be abandoned and have achieved all that needs to be achieved, we'll then be able to explain everything to others and liberate them too. We also dedicate for the long and healthy life of all our guides, our teachers, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's preserved this tradition, almost single-handedly, saved the Tibetan tradition from falling away. Lama Zopa, who's kept it in the Western minds and hearts since Lama Yeshe passed away. For all his centers and projects, may they be successful around the world. If anybody known to us, who needs help, is struggling, we dedicate whatever we can. If we can't find a practical way to help, then come back to your bodhicitta. They're included in all sentient beings. Okay, thank you, everybody. Very nice to share module 3 with you, presenting the path. Hopefully that gives you some idea, of how to go further with, the Lamrim. And, it's always, Lamas would always suggest we concentrate on the Lamrim for us because it's so easy to get to the meaning really clearly and really quickly. And that's really learning outlines. Once we're learning outlines, then we listen to Lamas like Geshe Jampal, His Holiness Lama Zopa. We'll be able to put it into quickly into place and know what we're talking about. So hopefully all I've done is prepare you for when the real Lamas come along. So let's see if we have the calm for that to happen soon. Thank you so much, everybody. This will be on YouTube a bit later. If those people who are just doing the completion card could now stay online, and let's arrange times for that then. Otherwise, you're very free to enjoy the rest of your evening and then just watch on the website for when the next DB module will be, which is Guru devotion, or how to rely correctly on a spiritual guide, a spiritual mentor. We'll look at that in the next 6 weeks. Thank you, everybody.